After 5 long years in prison, Anthony found himself standing in a cemetery, the weight of his past heavy on his shoulders. The light rain fell softly, mingling with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, but he barely noticed. His heart was heavy with pain and resignation as he approached the grave of his late girlfriend, Sophia. This was his first chance to confront the memories that haunted him since that fateful night. I've noticed only 98% of you who watch haven't subscribed. Come on, guys, show some love and support. Thanks a bunch to those who have already subscribed. As he knelt before the simple white marble headstone, a chill ran through him. The inscription was familiar, but something was off. The dates etched into the stone indicated that Sophia had died before the accident that had changed his life forever. Confusion gripped him as he traced the letters with trembling fingers, desperate to make sense of the apparent mistake. Rising to his feet, Anthony scanned the cemetery, searching for answers in the silence. He made his way to the caretaker's shed, where an elderly man sat hunched over a table, distracted by a battery-operated radio. "Excuse me, sir," Anthony said, trying to keep the anxiety from his voice. "I need some information. How long has this headstone been here?" The caretaker looked up, his expression indifferent. "Which headstone?" "Sophia Clark. I heard she was buried here," Anthony replied, his voice faltering. The old man frowned, scratching his chin. "There's no Sophia Clark buried here. I'm certain of that." Stunned, Anthony blinked. "That can't be right. I just saw the headstone." He pointed back in the direction he had come. The caretaker shook his head. "Let me check." He rummaged through a thick notebook of records, and after a few tense minutes, he confirmed, "There's no Sophia Clark in this cemetery. Never was." The words hit Anthony like a punch to the gut. If Sophia wasn't buried there, then where was she? And why would someone place a false headstone? A terrifying thought crept into his mind. What if Sophia was alive? The idea seemed absurd, yet it felt more plausible than the reality he had been living for the past 5 years. Determined to uncover the truth, Anthony left the cemetery, his fists clenched as he fought to contain the whirlwind of emotions threatening to consume him. He knew he wouldn't find peace until he discovered what had really happened. After a sleepless night, Anthony decided to reach out to George, his childhood friend and now a police officer. He walked through the bustling streets of the city, the contrast between the vibrant world around him and the chaos in his mind creating a surreal atmosphere. When he arrived at the police station, he hesitated at the glass doors, memories of his past flooding back. Taking a deep breath, he entered. George was at his desk, his uniform crisp and his attention focused on a computer. When he looked up and saw Anthony, surprise flickered across his face, quickly followed by apprehension. "Anthony," he said, standing up and adjusting his belt, "I didn't expect to see you so soon. How are you?" "I've been better," Anthony replied, forcing a half smile. "I need your help, George. Something very strange is happening." George gestured for him to sit. "What happened?" Anthony quickly recounted his visit to the cemetery, describing the headstone in the absence of any burial records. George's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, leaning forward. "Absolutely. I need to know what really happened, George. Something is wrong." George remained silent for a moment, weighing the situation. He hesitated, knowing the risks involved, especially with someone as powerful as Robert Clark in the mix. But the determination in Anthony's eyes moved him. "All right, Anthony, I'll help you, but we need to be careful. We're dealing with powerful people, and I can't take risks without concrete evidence." They began by analyzing the accident records, using George's access to the police database. At first, the information seemed ordinary, but as they cross-referenced the data, discrepancies emerged. The death certificate for Sophia contained generic and confusing information, and a secondary report identified the victim as someone completely different. Mary, a woman with a different age and background. "This doesn't make sense," George said, frowning as he reviewed the documents. "It's as if they deliberately swapped identities." Anthony felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying Sophia didn't die in that accident?" George looked at him seriously. "All indications are that it wasn't her. If that's true, someone worked hard to hide what really happened." The revelation hung over them like a dark cloud. George knew they were entering dangerous territory, but he couldn't abandon his friend. I'll keep investigating, but you need to be prepared for what you might find. This goes beyond an identity swap. If Robert Clark is involved, there could be much more behind it. Determined, Anthony wandered the city streets, searching for answers in places that once held happy memories. He visited the small cafe where he and Sophia used to spend afternoons, but no one remembered her. The reality of time passing without her was harsh. Next, he went to the central square, where he spotted a man sitting alone, his face partially hidden by a cap. Something about him seemed familiar. As Anthony approached cautiously, he realized it was Charles, a former employee of the Clark family who had disappeared from the city. "Anthony, I can't believe it. You're out," Charles said, his voice low and hoarse. "I am, and I need answers. You worked for Robert Clark. Tell me what happened to Sophia." Charles looked around nervously before gesturing for Anthony to sit beside him. "Listen, kid, I shouldn't be talking to you, but..." He paused, taking a deep breath. "Robert sent Sophia away right after the accident. She was alive, but he forced her to go to another city, far from everyone." Anthony's heart raced. Why would he do that? "Because she was pregnant," Charles murmured. "Robert would never accept that his daughter had a child of her own. He thought it would tarnish the family name." The ground seemed to vanish beneath Anthony's feet. Sophia was pregnant. He had a child. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, revealing a much darker scheme than he had imagined. "Where is she now? Do you know where Robert sent her?" "I don't know. I only know that he placed her somewhere far from here and had the help of powerful people to erase any trace. After that, I got out of that job. I couldn't continue to be part of it." Charles stood up, looking at Anthony with a somber expression. "If you're going to mess with Robert Clark, be careful. He doesn't play around. He already destroyed your life once and won't hesitate to do it again." Anthony stood still in the square, Charles's words echoing in his mind. The mystery was taking on even darker contours, but now he had a new reason to fight. If he had a child, he would find him. If Sophia was alive, he would discover where she was. The dirt road wound through isolated hills, surrounded by tall trees casting dense shadows under the pale moonlight. Anthony drove in silence, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Beside him, George consulted a scribbled map illuminated by the glow of his cell phone. They were searching for a remote property, one of Robert Clark's discreet holdings that had gone unnoticed for years. "It's here," George said, pointing to a rusty gate that barely stood out in the darkness. Anthony parked the car and got out, his heart racing. He pushed the gate open, which creaked in protest, and they walked down a narrow path leading to a modest, rundown house. "Are you sure about this?" Anthony asked, glancing at George. "There's no other explanation. Everything points to this place," George replied firmly. Anthony approached the door and tried the knob, which turned easily. He pushed it open, the smell of mold and aged wood filling his nostrils. The interior was dark, lit only by the faint light coming from a broken window. The house felt abandoned, but every corner exuded a sense of buried history. "Let's search," George said, pulling out a flashlight. They began to rummage through the place, the furniture covered with dusty sheets. The silence was unsettling, and Anthony felt the weight of the moment as if the walls were hiding the secrets he desperately wanted to uncover. In a small room at the back, Anthony found a wooden chest locked with a simple padlock. He broke it open with a tool George had brought. Inside, he discovered a stack of documents, but what caught his attention were a set of handwritten letters. He immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from Sophia. With trembling hands, Anthony picked up the first letter and began to read. The words seemed to whisper directly to him, bridging time and space. "Anthony, my love, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to believe that you will. I'm being kept here against my will. My father forced me to come to this place, saying it was for my own good. I'm pregnant, Anthony. Our child is growing inside me, and he wants to erase you from my life, to erase our story. But I won't forget you. Never." Tears welled in Anthony's eyes as he continued reading. Each letter revealed Sophia's isolation, her struggle to maintain sanity, and her unwavering love for him. She described how Robert forced her to assume a new identity, to make her disappear for good. "She tried to reach you, Anthony. All this was to separate you from her and your child," George said, his voice filled with indignation. Among the documents, there was also evidence of Robert's schemes, records of suspicious bank transfers, forged contracts, and explicit orders to cover up the accident that had changed Anthony's life. It was more than just evidence against Robert. It was a window into the labyrinth of lies he had built. Anthony clenched the letters tightly, his chest burning with a mix of pain and fury. The image of Sophia alone, fighting against a system controlled by her own father, filled him with determination. Now he knew he couldn't stop. Sophia was alive, he had a child, and Robert Clark would pay for everything. As they left the house, George carrying the box of documents, Anthony looked up at the starry sky. For the first time in years, he felt he had something to fight for. Sophia's letters were more than proof of her love. They were a call to action, and he would answer it, no matter what lay ahead. The sound of tires on asphalt seemed distant as Anthony drove toward the neighboring city, his heart pounding loudly in the tense silence. Beside him, George reviewed the details they had discovered. Sophia was living as Charlotte Morgan, married to Victor Simmons, a respected businessman. It was a new life built on lies and pressure, but she was alive. Anthony felt a mix of anxiety and growing anger. He needed to see her, but he didn't know how he would face the truths that would come to light. They arrived in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and large houses, all with immaculate facades. George parked discreetly just a few meters from the residence they had tracked down. Anthony stood silent for a moment, staring at the brick house. The lights were on, and he could see shadows moving behind the living room curtains. "Are you ready?" George asked, observing Anthony's tense demeanor. "I'll never be ready, but I need to do this," Anthony replied, stepping out of the car. He walked to the front door, feeling the weight of each step. When he rang the doorbell, the sound echoed through the silent street. A few seconds passed before the door opened. There she was, Sophia, or Charlotte, as she was now known. Her face was slightly different, her features more mature, but still unmistakable. Their eyes met, and he could see the wave of shock that passed through her. "Anthony," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. She looked around, as if expecting someone to appear and stop them. "You shouldn't be here." Anthony took a deep breath, struggling to control his emotions. "We need to talk, Sophia. I can't live without understanding what happened." She hesitated for a moment but opened the door, gesturing for him to come in. The interior of the house was sophisticated, decorated with modern and elegant furniture, but to Anthony, it felt like a gilded cage. They sat in the living room, and Sophia looked visibly uncomfortable. "What do you want to know?" she asked, avoiding his gaze. "I want the truth. Why did you pretend to be dead? Why did you never reach out to me? And where is our son?" The last question came out as a whisper, laden with pain. Sophia brought her hands to her face, clearly shaken. "I never wanted to leave you, Anthony. My father, he forced me. After the accident, he said you were dangerous, that being with you would put our son at risk. He forced me to disappear, to change my name, and marry Victor, all to maintain control over me and over Enzo." The name Enzo sounded like a blow to Anthony. He tried to process everything he heard, but anger began to rise within him. "You had a choice, Sophia. You could have fought for us. You knew what I was going through, what I was losing, and still you let him destroy everything." Sophia began to cry but soon looked up, her expression determined. "You think it was easy for me? I was pregnant, alone, and he threatened me in every possible way. He said he would take my son from me, that he would do to you what he did to so many others who crossed his path. I did what I thought was necessary to protect Enzo." Her words hit Anthony like a punch, but he began to see beyond his anger. Sophia was also a victim, manipulated and forced to make terrible decisions. He felt the anger subside, replaced by deep sadness. "Enzo, does he know about me?" Anthony asked, his voice trembling. He thinks Victor is his father. It was the condition my father imposed when he forged the whole lie. But Enzo is yours, Anthony. He always has been," she replied, tears streaming down her face. The weight of those words fell upon him. He had a son, a boy who knew nothing about his existence. Anthony closed his eyes for a moment, trying to compose himself. When he looked back at Sophia, The pain and resentment were still there, but something else emerged: renewed determination. "This needs to end, Sophia. Your father won't control our lives anymore. He destroyed my past, but I won't let him destroy the future we can still have. I will fight for Enzo, for you, for everything he took from us." Sophia nodded slowly, as if finally feeling there was a way out. Anthony knew the battle was just beginning, but in that moment, he found something he hadn't felt in years: hope. As the sun began to rise, Sophia, Anthony, and George gathered for the first time in a safe place, a discreet inn on the outskirts of the city. Sophia looked nervous, casting furtive glances at the windows, her hands trembling as she held a folder full of documents. The decision to help Anthony and George had not been easy. Betraying her own father, even after all he had done, was an act that haunted her. But she knew she had to act. The truth needed to come to light. "Here is everything I managed to gather over the years," Sophia said, placing the folder on the table. "Forged contracts, suspicious bank transfers, names of people involved in his network. My father is not just a powerful businessman. He leads a scheme that involves corruption, drug trafficking, and money laundering. He controls everything from local politicians to members of the police force." George opened the folder and began to analyze the documents, his gaze attentive but filled with indignation. "This is enough to make a big impact, but we need additional evidence. Something more direct so that it won't be dismissed or buried by the people Robert controls." Sophia nodded. "I know where he keeps the most important files, at the main house on the farm, but getting in there will be dangerous. He has guards, cameras, and a system that monitors everything." Anthony, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "I'll go in. I've wasted too much time letting him set the rules. If this is what we need to expose him, then I'll do it." George shook his head. "We can't be impulsive. If we get caught, Robert won't hesitate to eliminate any threat. We need to plan this carefully." As the trio discussed the next steps, Sophia mentioned something that left Anthony silent. "Before we proceed with this, you need to meet your son." Anthony felt conflicted. He knew Enzo had grown up believing Victor was his father. Entering his life would mean destroying a part of that reality, but the idea of continuing to be a stranger to his own son was unbearable. That afternoon, Sophia took Anthony to the park where Enzo used to play. From a distance, he saw the boy for the first time: messy brown hair, curious eyes, and infectious energy as he ran with the ball. Anthony felt his heart tighten. He wanted to run to his son, hug him, and tell him everything, but he knew he needed time. "I'll introduce him to you as a friend of mine," Sophia explained. "It's the best we can do for now." Enzo ran up to them, holding the ball. "Mommy, who is he?" he asked, pointing to Anthony. Sophia smiled, though her eyes were full of emotion. "This is Anthony, a friend of mine from a long time ago." Anthony bent down to be at Enzo's eye level. "Hey there, champ. Do you like soccer?" Enzo nodded enthusiastically, starting to talk about the games he watched on TV and his skills. Gradually, the conversation flowed, and Anthony felt an immediate connection, but he knew he would have to earn his son's trust. In the following days, Anthony continued to get closer to Enzo, showing up without revealing the truth. The relationship started tense, with the boy hesitating to open up, but small daily interactions began to build a bridge between them. Little by little, Enzo started to admire Anthony, seeing in him something he never saw in Victor: sincerity and genuine attention. Meanwhile, the plan to take down Robert was progressing. George gained access to surveillance equipment and escape routes, while Sophia mapped out the layout of the farm, pointing out where the confidential files were stored. The atmosphere was tense, but filled with determination. Robert always thought he was in control, but he underestimated how capable we are when we fight together, Sophia said, her voice full of conviction. Anthony looked at her and George, realizing that for the first time in years, he had allies by his side. It wasn't just a battle for justice. It was a fight to reclaim his life and protect his son's future. The night before their planned operation, Robert discovered Anthony and Sophia's movements. His contacts had informed him about George's approach and the handling of sensitive documents. Robert's anger was palpable. He knew he needed to act quickly to preserve his influence and control over Sophia and Enzo. The next morning, Sophia received a call. Robert's cold voice made her shiver. "You're playing with fire, Sophia," he said slowly. "I thought I made it clear what would happen if you betrayed my trust. Are you willing to lose Enzo? Because if you continue with this, he won't be under your protection anymore." Fear dominated her for a moment, but then anger took over. For years, she had endured her father's manipulations, but now she knew she wasn't alone. With trembling hands, she hung up the phone and sought out Anthony and George. When she arrived at the inn, her pale face revealed the gravity of the situation. "He knows. My father knows what we're doing. He threatened to take Enzo from me," she said, barely holding back tears. Anthony immediately stood up, his expression stern. "He won't touch our son. Not this time." "George, we need to reinforce Sophia and Enzo's security," George agreed, already grabbing his phone to make some calls. "I'll talk to some trusted people at the precinct. We can't involve everyone because Robert's influence runs deep, but there are still officers on our side." While George arranged protection for Sophia and Enzo, Anthony and Sophia stayed to discuss the next steps. "I know you're scared, Sophia, but we need to stay focused. He's trying to intimidate us because he knows we're close to taking him down." Sophia looked at Anthony, determination beginning to replace fear. "I won't let him win again. Enzo means everything to me, and now I know we're not alone." That night, things took an even more dangerous turn. Robert sent 2 of his henchmen to surveil Anthony and Sophia's movements. George, who had noticed a suspicious car circling the inn, decided to take action. He and a fellow officer set up an ambush, intercepting the henchmen before they could act. The scene was tense. George pointed his gun at the men, trying to extract information about Robert's next moves. "Speak now or end up in a cell before dawn," he said, his voice hard. One of the henchmen, realizing there was no way out, revealed Robert's plan. He intended to take Enzo to one of his overseas properties, far from Sophia and Anthony. The news hit like a bomb. Anthony could barely contain his fury. He knew he needed to act quickly to protect his son. The next day, while Sophia and Enzo were being moved to a safe location with police protection, Anthony and George prepared for a direct confrontation. They discovered that Robert would be at one of his companies, an office used for discreet meetings with his criminal allies. It was the ideal moment to expose the man who had destroyed so many lives. The night brought a charged atmosphere as Anthony, George, and 2 trusted officers infiltrated the building. The evidence Sophia had provided was with George, ready to be presented to the authorities, but they needed to capture Robert in the act. Robert was waiting for them, his expression that of a man who wasn't afraid to risk everything. "So that's it," he said with an ironic smile. "You think you can take me down? You're nothing compared to what I've built. Don't underestimate what a man with something to lose can do." Anthony replied, his eyes fixed on the man who had destroyed his life. "You destroyed your family, Robert, and now you'll pay for it." The confrontation escalated as henchmen tried to stop Anthony and George's advance. But with the help of the officers, they managed to reach Robert. When he realized there was no way to escape, his mask of control fell away, revealing a desperate man. "Everything I did was to protect my family, to preserve what is mine," Robert shouted, his voice echoing through the office. "You destroyed your family, Robert, and now you'll pay for it," Sophia responded, having arrived at the scene, escorted by the police. With the evidence in George's hands and the support of the police, Robert was arrested right there. His influence collapsed like a house of cards. As he was led away, he cast one last glance at Sophia, full of resentment. "You'll regret this," he said, but Sophia simply turned her face away, determined not to let fear control her again. The danger was not over yet, but Anthony knew they had taken an important step. Now it was only a matter of time before Robert faced the full extent of justice. More importantly, Anthony felt that for the first time, his family was a little safer. The courtroom was packed, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation as the judge announced Robert Clark's sentence. For weeks, the evidence collected by George, Sophia, and Anthony had been presented in a meticulous trial that exposed the true extent of Robert's crimes: bribery, fraudulent contracts, drug trafficking, and money laundering. His criminal network was as complex as it was powerful, but now everything was collapsing. "Robert Clark, you have been found guilty on multiple charges, including corruption, document forgery, and tampering with evidence in legal proceedings. "You are sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole," declared the judge as the gavel struck. Robert, seated at the front, looked like an aged and defeated man. For the first time, his mask of arrogance had fallen away. During the trial, pressured by the overwhelming evidence, he confessed to part of his actions, including the manipulation of the accident that had changed Anthony's life. "I did what was necessary to protect my family. At least that's what I believed at the time. I manipulated the accident evidence. I made it look like Sophia had died because it was easier to distance her from Anthony that way. I used another identity, created a perfect scenario, but no one died that night." His words echoed in Anthony's mind, and for so long, he had carried the guilt of a non-existent crime. The weight of this revelation was overwhelming, but also liberating. Now, with Robert behind bars, Anthony felt that for the first time, he could breathe without bearing the burden of such a cruel lie. After the sentencing, Sophia and Anthony had a long conversation. Now free from her father's control, Sophia revealed the truth behind her marriage to Victor. "It was all a sham," she said as they walked through a quiet park. "Victor accepted the arrangement because he was also trapped under my father's influence. There was no love, only convenience. He filed for divorce right after the trial." "And now?" Anthony asked, his voice hesitant. Sophia smiled sadly. "Now it's your turn to build something with Enzo. He needs you, Anthony, and you deserve this time with him." Anthony nodded, understanding what Sophia was saying. He knew there was much to repair, but he also knew his priority was to reconnect with his son. Their relationship was still new and full of uncertainties, but there was something undeniable between them, a bond that only time and effort could strengthen. In the days that followed, Anthony moved to a small apartment near Enzo's school, trying to create a routine. He spent afternoons with the boy, playing soccer in the park or helping him with homework. Every small step in their relationship was a victory for Anthony. "Daddy, can I show you something?" Enzo asked one day, holding a drawing in his small hands. Anthony felt emotional every time the boy called him father. He took the paper and saw a colorful drawing of a man and a boy holding a soccer ball. "Did you make this? It's amazing, champ." Anthony smiled, feeling a joy he hadn't experienced in a long time. Although the journey was difficult, Anthony knew he was starting something real. Sophia, for her part, dedicated herself to rebuilding her own life away from her father's shadow and the forced choices he had imposed. She kept in touch with Anthony and Enzo, but respected both of their spaces. On a sunny morning, Anthony stepped out onto the apartment balcony and watched the city. It was a new day, full of possibilities. For the first time in years, he felt that his life was in his own hands. The scars of the past were still there, but now they were marks of survival, not defeat. He looked at Enzo, who was playing with a ball in the living room, and smiled. His son was living proof that despite the lies and pain, the truth had prevailed. Anthony didn't have all the answers, but he had something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Taking a deep breath, he let the fresh air fill his lungs. The past would stay behind, where it belonged. It was time to build a future, not just for himself, but for Enzo and the life they could have together. As the sun illuminated the horizon, Anthony realized that for the first time, he was truly free. I hope you enjoyed this rewritten version of the story. If you did, please subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below with your thoughts. See you in the next video.